Tonight's program is Coding Bootcamps, Healthy Working Relationships Between Graphic Designers, Coders, and Web Developers. Speaking tonight is Don Wonk, and we thank you so much for coming to us, Don. We really appreciate it. He will be sharing his valuable experience with us in an area of great interest for creative professionals. And with that, I will give it to Spike, our program director, whom we have to thank for tonight's presentation.
Okay, so thank you very much for that, Mary. I'm going to share my screen. I have a few things to show, and then I'll get started with I'll give a more formal introduction of our speaker and get the program started. So I wanted to tell you what I have. This is where I have scheduled for February. I believe it's the 25th. And this will be a tour of the Campana Center for Ideation and Invention, which is like a Fab Lab makerspace in Lorain County. So that's what I have planned for February. I want to show you, our YouTube page, which I think, a lot of people kind of forget about, but, there's a lot of playlists here. And, I'm actually recruiting people for the May showcase, and I'm actually doing pretty well okay so far. Nice. So I have some speakers for that. And I wanted to point out that the program we did last August in 2020, the Introduction to User Experience and Design Thinking, will be relate to some of what we talk about tonight. So in case you wanted to watch that. Again, afterwards, you're motivated. I thought that was an excellent program, and that's well worth looking at. So there's a playlist of all the different year showcases, and then there's one with the monthly programming. I'm showing a lot of the ones about the Affinity. I promote that one quite a bit. I wanted to give a shout out to Sarah Coggins, who's here tonight. She's the one who records the videos and edits them and posts them to our YouTube page. So wave, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for that. So I wanted to officially thank her for that. I wanted to also tell you that this is a really good series of ebooks, Take Control books, and I will be having a blog posting reviewing the one about preserving your personal digital legacy, but there's lots of digital topic books here, and I'm able to get review copies for people who want to write reviews for the blog. So iOS 15, AirTags, Apple ID, there's lots of interesting books in this, and they're really written at a nice level. They're very approachable, but they can get to be you can really get to be a power user without getting too overwhelmed. So I think it's a pretty good series. I wanted to tell you that I also have planned for the summer. There's the Type 1 typefaces are going to be going away next January, no longer supported by Adobe Creative Cloud. And I'll be planning probably a panel discussion on that, but Extensis is doing a webinar on planning for the demise of PostScript fonts, and that's on March 2nd. So I wanted I don't really have, they're still working on it. It's kind of early. I have a meeting with them next week, but I put this link in the chat. So if you want to sign up for this seminar, go for it. I will be there for sure, because I'm sure people are getting very nervous about replacing their fonts and planning for next January. I don't think you have to really get serious about it till around June, but this will be the first event. So I'm going to introduce our speaker.
Before you do, can I ask a question?
Sure.
What fonts are going away? I'm just curious.
Well, there's three different kinds of fonts, Don. There's Type 1 PostScript fonts, which are have been around since the very beginning. Those have a screen font. I've done a lot of work with fonts, a screen font and a printer font. So there's you can have one screen font with lots of printer fonts, and they're limited to 256 characters. So you had to have like a expert set for other glyphs or fractions, like you couldn't do them. The newest standard of fonts are open type fonts, and true type fonts. And those have the benefits, especially open type, where you can have thousands of characters, mostly for Asian languages, but you can also do quality typesetting with them. And there's just one file. So I imagine that's the reason why the type 1 fonts are going away. But a lot of publishers still use them, which is why it's kind of an issue. We'll be talking about Google fonts, which you can use, which I know those are really good for web design, but I don't know how good they are for print. And there's a lot of fonts that come with your Creative Cloud subscription from Adobe, and then it's going, it has a lot to do with branding and advertising, so there's going to be a lot of concern about switching them. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, they're just antiquated and going to go away, so a lot of applications may have to be revamped appropriately.
Yeah, so people are going to have to switch their libraries and jobs to different fonts and find ones that match exactly. And then also, if it's a branding font, you'll want to purchase it so that it's not something where, you know how a movie can leave Netflix and go to HBO? You don't want that to happen with your branding font.
That's a good analogy.
So at any rate, let me go. So anyway, Don just was, so let me enter, there's our bio for Don. Don is a admissions representative for Week Encoded. The vendor for our program tonight. He has more than 45 years of experience in the information technology area. He's been a programmer, software sales executive, a sales manager, and a software sales and implementation trainer and a marketing executive. He's enjoyed many career opportunities that his foundation as a programmer has provided. The most rewarding positions have offered him the privilege of mentoring individuals into successful careers in the IT arena. So in his spare time, Don is an avid boater and fisherman. So I don't know whether you want to offer your raffle prize for tonight, Don, since we don't have as big a, like 100 people here for tickets, but if you'd like to, you can do that, and I will show you. There's a link on the right here. There's a donate page. So if you want to buy tickets, so you can buy a ticket for $10 right there on the donate link.
Can you make this available throughout the week? Maybe some other people that would be, interested in fishing would be able to enter. So
yeah, that's a good idea.
We should all be seeing just a web application design and development cooperation challenge. The approach that I took to this, I had a lot of coaching from Spike in what topics would be addressed. So I try to incorporate just about everything that he thought the group would be interested in. I've been in the industry, as he said. Actually, I think I lied to him. I was adding up the years now. It's been 50 years that I've been involved in IT. I started out with punched cards. I don't know if anybody in the room has ever seen a punched card, but I sorted and collated a whole bunch of those early on in my career and have just thoroughly enjoyed almost every single minute of what I've done. And as I look at the different trends that I've observed over the years, the most exciting by far is the one that we're in right now. This whole web application environment, including desktop or laptop devices, as well as handheld devices or notepads, is just unbelievable. And the demand that I'm seeing for professionals in the industry is way beyond anything I've ever observed in years past. And there have been some pretty significant events like 2001. A whole bunch of people were working then, getting ready for the turn of the century. But this whole web thing has really got things extremely exciting for all of us, designers, developers, executives, our school, everybody. So as I thought back, just the historical aspects of things, I was able to draw some parallels. I don't know if anybody in the room is familiar with the concept of alchemy. Now, this was back in the Middle Ages, and they had individuals there that were called alchemists, and they were defined as a person who transforms or creates something in a seemingly magical process. They were charged by the royalty of the day, literally, to turn lead, as you see in the upper corner here, into gold. I see a lot of parallels today. We have a word that's been coined by the industry, webologist, and that includes all of us that are on this call. And I like to define that one as well as a person who transforms or creates something through a seemingly magical process. And we're charged with taking those web applications and turning them into gold. And those web applications put gold in many different pockets. They put it in our pockets as people who develop the web applications or design the web applications. It puts money in stockholders' pockets, and it puts money in the pockets of the industry that are taking advantage of those web applications to deliver their goods and services. I don't see what we do as a science. I see what we do as an art. And that's both sides of the development paradigm. Web developers as well as designers, it's truly art. I think more so on the design side, but believe me, as I've worked with so many developers that are building web apps, so many of them are so much better than others because they're truly coding artists. So what is transpired now is we've really got two schools of alchemists or two schools of webologists. And I break those apart as the coders and the designers. And they are both bringing web apps to the market, but I don't think we've done a really good job yet of weaving together the various formulas that they think should be used in the development of those web applications. Now, as I said, I started building web applications, or not web applications, but graphical applications back in the GUI days, the graphical user interfaces, when we had client servers machines. And we didn't have designers per se back then involved in the development process, but there was a lot of headbutting that went on between developers on what were the best graphical approaches that should be used and the best ways to present the concept of those applications that we were building. Well, today, I see a tremendous amount of headbutting going on, unfortunately, between coders and designers. Most recently, I worked for a company here in Cleveland called OnShift. Some of you may have heard of them. I joined them about 8 years ago, 9 years, and we had 3 people working in the company, 1 developer and 1 manager and 1 implementation specialist. That was me. Excuse me. They have grown now from the 2 customers we had back then. They have 6,000 customers here in Cleveland, and they're resident in Playhouse Square. They've got, I believe, 250 employees now. And when I was there in those later years, before I got tired of traveling, I was on airplanes almost every week. When I left there, they had grown to the point where they had hired some in-house designers. And it was almost comical to see the infighting that went on between the designers and the coders. The coders had been there all along. They had grown to a staff of 60 or 70, and they had, I think, 3 or 4 people that were in a UI UX department. And the ongoing battles were almost comical, but frustrating for me as one of the implementation specialists there, because I could not get the user interface changes made that those graphical folks were suggesting would be much more productive for the people I was training. So I know the frustration that you folks must feel as you're dealing with big development organizations. So my take on all this is we need to evolve as an industry. Isn't going to happen overnight, but we need to evolve as an industry to where we've got a symbiotic relationship between the coders and the designers. Now, I don't know if everybody's familiar with symbiotic. I like talking about it because I have a favorite symbiotic relationship that I've dealt with intimately, and it's there on the screen. It's a shark. Sharks, and I've liked to fish a lot in Florida as well. Sharks have a fish that they live symbiotically with. And the way that they do that is this fish, which is called a remora, attaches itself with a huge suction cup to the back of that shark. And as the shark is swimming around, the remora changes positions on the shark's back and belly and side and keeps the shark completely clean. When the shark finally finds something to eat, and I've seen them do this, I saw them demolish a stingray once, all kinds of small bits of whatever they're eating falls off into the water, and the remoras disengage from the shark, eat those little bits, and reattach themselves to the shark again. So it's a perfect symbiotic relationship. We need that same kind of relationship in our world between those people that actually do the coding and the people that are designers, either straight up design or UI, UX. Something that we have to recognize, though, in that symbiotic relationship is somebody is steering the boat and somebody is along symbiotically for the ride. And it isn't always one group or the other. Sometimes, as a designer, you're the shark. You are the ones that are driving the direction of that web application, and the coders are following along in your footsteps under your direction. Other situations, it's you are the remora as the designer, and the coders are going to be the ones that are going to steer the ship. And I think one of the big differences in who determines who's steering is management of the company and how far thinking they are, and also the nature of the application. When I was at OnShift, the applications that we had were very heavily data oriented. They were schedules for nursing homes for the nurses and the nurses' aides. So a lot of text on the screen in almost the entire application. So it was almost natural that the coders drove that ship. Now, if you look at some of my other favorite websites like Lowe's for home development or home remodeling, or Menards or Home Depot, or my favorite, Cabela's, it sells fishing and hunting equipment. They really have great graphic representation there. And I am almost certain that in those environments, it's the graphic endeavor that's actually driving how those web applications evolved. But I think I heard Mary say this earlier when we were just chatting. She said the key to success between the design folks and the development people is communication. It's communication, it's understanding, and the hardest part, and I've observed this through my whole career in any project team I've ever been on, you got to set your egos aside if you're going to be truly successful. And I got to say, some of the hugest egos that I've had to deal with have been developers. They're just, in my opinion, egotistical by nature. So what I've tried to do in the following section here is discuss some of the issues that hinder and impede the cooperation level between those groups of people. And these are just observations. They are not necessarily absolute truth, but perceptions that people have about both design and coders. For example, designers' role in web development is to provide graphic design only. That's the perception that a lot of web developers have. But I mean, the reality is that designers are playing a much bigger role than they ever played before in how that application should be designed, coded, and delivered to the end user community. And in many cases, like they were attempting to do at OnShift, the role of the user experience, or UX as it's referred to, is being awarded very frequently now to a designer as opposed to somebody that is a web coder. So what's the solution to this particular problem? And the solution, again, gets back, it's communication. We've got to learn to communicate better with one another. And it's got to be done at the outset of a project by the stakeholders, who are typically the project lead, the designers, and the coders. And one of the most difficult decisions that has to be made is who is the shark in that particular development effort. And it's a very fine line that has to be walked by everyone, but there is no clear-cut answer. Again, I get back, it's art. It isn't science yet. It may evolve someday to where the designers, and I think it probably should, that the designers are the ones that are always going to be the shark. But right now we're in a situation where the bulk of those web applications that exist in this world have been developed by coders, and they feel they're in charge. But I think that's gradually going to happen. And I think it's the designers are the ones that have to be the true diplomats. They have to be the ones that set aside their own egos at times. And they've got to be great politicians to get projects accomplished. Another perception is designers have a reputation with some developers that they're high maintenance, that form takes precedence over function of the application. If you've got the most beautiful graphic, a coder might feel that you want it integrated into the application just because of its beauty. When the reality is, in some applications, the graphic far exceeds the function of an object that a developer might pick. For example, if I'm looking at and selecting automobiles from one of the large automobile manufacturers' websites, a pure coder might have just a series of buttons there with F-150 for a 150 Ford truck, or an F-250, where a designer might make that button look exactly like what an F-150 truck looks like. Much more enticing to me as a person that's considering purchasing something than is the plain old square F-150 button that web coder would like to build. So the communications have to be wide open between the designer and the developer, and the designers have to be ready to defend their position as to why they feel that particular form is going to serve the end user community and the ultimate objective of that application much better. So again, communication, but a little bit of will, a little bit of politics, and a strong backbone on the part of the designer. Perception. Now, this is coming from the design side. Web developers are perceived as being difficult to work with. Um, no, just between you and me, I mentioned this earlier. I agree. I think developers are difficult to work with. You know, I've worked with a whole bunch of them and implementing these things they're building and asking to get changes made. It's not easy, but I think something that the design world has to be sensitive to, and I thoroughly understand this, that they are the ones that are charged with delivering on time. So the amount of effort that you impose on them with a design change that you want to make directly relates to the way they are measured in terms of delivery. Very important to them. They've got to make things that are easy to test. They've got to make them easy to change. So naming conventions, file formats that you use, and HTML conventions. You know, the CSS, if you're familiar with that, cascading style sheets might dictate, are also very important. And all of it is important because they've got to make applications that are flexible and easily changed. So understanding the development world is really something that you all should endeavor to do if you want to develop the kinds of relationships symbiotically that we're going to need to be good application producers. So the designers need to have an understanding of, you know, just basic coding development process, and they've got to be sensitive and adhere to standards. You can't give them images in two different formats. You've got to make sure that when you deliver something that has maybe come out of a design tool that's HTML oriented, that you're adhering to the standards for that particular site. So sensitive to how they develop and why they are so concerned, and then adhere to those standards. Something else, I don't know if all of you are familiar with this, but I'm going to mention it a couple times this evening. You must learn the agile development process. If you're not familiar with it, do a little reading about it. And in a nutshell, we used to use something called waterfall development technology or development methodology. And it was very long, laborious, and very inflexible. About 12 or 15 years ago, this agile development methodology came to the market. And with agile, it was designed so that when things like COVID happened and companies had to spin on a dime and do all of their business online, that as development efforts were underway, they could change very rapidly. Now, there's a couple of things in the agile development methodology that I find a little bit humorous, is a terminology they use. They bite off chunks of an application that typically they can accomplish in 4 to 6 weeks. They call that time period a sprint. So they're going to be talking to you and say, yeah, we got to finish a sprint in 2 more weeks. You've got to get those graphics to me. Well, they're saying they have committed to the end users that they're going to deliver the first 4 or 5 modules in that particular sprint. The other thing they stolen from rugby actually is the term scrum. In rugby, I don't know if anybody's ever watched it played, they have a formation where the players put their arms around one another's shoulders, standing up in a circle. The ball gets dropped, there's a mad scramble. First time I saw an agile development scrum was in another office. I looked over, there were 6 guys standing in a circle. And development teams that use agile do it every single day. And what they are discussing amongst themselves is individual must report. What did I do yesterday? What am I going to do tomorrow? And is anybody standing in my way? Is anybody blocking my progress at this point in time? I'm going to advocate to you that if you are teaming, whether you're working inside with development people, you all work for the same company, or you're on a contract with a company as a designer, if you're working on a project, you should be included in those scrum meetings. And anymore, the scrums are being done virtually and in person. They're hybrid. So learn about Agile, learn about Scrum, learn what is incorporated into the sprints, because you guys are going to be pointed to occasionally in a Scrum as a blocker. You know, Spike is blocking me. He hasn't delivered those graphics that I need to complete the screen that I'm building at this point in time. So learn what coding development process is all about. I'm going to talk about that later. That's really why I'm here. I'd like to see some of you, more of you, if one of you has already been to our school. So learn Agile too. All right, another issue, web developers feel that forms should follow function, like a submit button as an example. And this is very similarly to what I talked about before. They think that a submit button's a submit button's a submit button, and they won't even ask you what your opinion is. Well, again, like that automobile selection, oftentimes the form of that button is going to make it all that much more productive, and make the whole application a great deal more elegant. So designers have got to be able to articulate their form choices and the reasons they've chosen those forms, as opposed to leaving that function up to a button, most typically that a developer would put in place. Another thing, and I suspect there might be some truth to this, and you folks would have to yay or nay this, but there's a perception that designers often prototype on the desktop, on their Mac or on their PC. And the reality, I feel, is that that is true in many cases. And unfortunately, desktop designs do not transfer to web browsers or to cell phones or to, excuse me, perhaps an iPad as the designer anticipated. So there needs to be more communication between the designer and the developer. And this is really kind of, I think, on the developer's plate, but it's a question you should become accustomed to asking. What's the target for this web app? Where is it going to end up running? And that will play a large role in font styles you choose, graphics you choose, and because they'll show differently in different web browsers. Perception that web designers and coders speak different languages. That's for darn sure. The developers, as I said, they talk about sprints and scrums and SQL and object-oriented and the whole agile approach. You folks, you talk about brand identity and aspect ratios, and that one I love, ransom notes, page layouts and typography, grids and so forth. We need to learn one another's terminologies. And excuse me, I think as time goes on, if I were running projects inside, and you certainly should suggest this to project managers you engage with, they should schedule some regular cross-education programs between designers and the coders, and to share things like terminology and make each other understand what your respective concerns are as you're designing, and their concerns about the designs that they're receiving. So there should be a lot of cross-pollination. And when you talk to developers, or when they talk to you, you should assume ignorance. When I'm training or teaching someone, I don't assume that they understand terms that we readily used. Like in our industry, for example, in the schooling industry, there's a term cohort. I had never heard it until I joined Week in Coding. Cohort to me was the guy that helped me rob a bank. Cohort, though, in scholastic parlance, means a group of people that have gone through a learning effort in a prescribed period of time. So I never assume when I'm talking to a prospective student, I don't talk about cohorts until I have defined that term for them. I think we need to do the same thing in planning sessions. We need to do the same thing in project meetings to begin this cross-pollination process. So those are just some of the various scenarios that I did quite a bit of research to put this together, that I found several different sources that brought up those as major issues that caused conflict between design and the actual coding development of those web apps. So I'm going to make this presentation available to you all, and it might behoove you to just glance through it as you are entering into an engagement with some development folks, and take heed to what some of their concerns are going to be. And you can address those before you even get started in developing. And you would do it very diplomatically. There's another avenue that you can take advantage of to bridge the gap between you and the actual coders or developers of the application. One that was brought to my attention by Spike that I hadn't been aware of is something called Adobe XD. And it was built as a UI, UX design and prototyping tool. And it's one where you can work collaboratively, simultaneously on that product, and it shares links and prototypes so that you can get feedback from all of the stakeholders simultaneously. Sounds like an absolutely outstanding product. What I am suggesting to you here is take the time and the effort to research. I've got 4, I think, really good products that I'm going to suggest to you. Research them, and in some cases, you might want to bring them in. I think this product in particular, if I remember correctly, was $9.99 a month to be able to use it, probably just single user license. But using and mastering products like this will automatically give you a leg up when you walk into a new engagement with a development team. Another is Webflow. This one actually lets you create production-ready HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I'm going to assume you're not familiar with those terms, although you may be. HTML, hypertext markup language, the language that describes colors and fonts and where fields and buttons reside on a screen, and then CSS, cascading style sheets that let me incorporate the brand of that particular organization into the designs that I'm delivering. And then JavaScript is the programming language that is used most prevalently on the front side of a web app. Web apps have 2 sides. Front side is what you designers typically are involved in, what the end user sees. Like when I'm buying something on Amazon, I'm looking at the front end when I'm interacting with those screens. The back end is when the front end developer sends the user ID and password to a web server somewhere off in Amazon land. They got thousands and thousands of web servers. And some developer on the backside grabs your user ID and password and does the heavy lifting, typically in a language called Java or C#, and says, yep, Don, you're a valid user. That is your valid password. And we see that you're a Prime user. And hey, thanks for buying those athletic shoes last week. So a lot goes on the back end. The programming on the front end is done in JavaScript. So this one is another one that's really powerful and would be a good learning tool for designers, and also a very good way to communicate the designs that you're building with the actual development, the coding community. Figma is supposedly one of the very best out there. Supposedly this version 2.0 of it. And what it does is actually lets you create a totally functional prototype, but then you can hand that off to the actual developers, and they can access a design in what they call code mode, meaning it's ready to be implemented directly into the application. However, many of the developers have something called a framework. They have specific ways that all of their web applications are coded, and they want to adhere to their own framework. So they can use this as a guide, but a great way of conveying and demonstrating the functionality of the designs you've put together. And then lastly, there's one called Zeppelin. Now, this one is pretty neat. I'd like to experiment with it, that lets you communicate designer to developer for collaboration. It was specifically designed for collaboration between the designer and developer. And they get everything that they need to bring your design to life through the collaboration products that come out of Zeppelin. So I would look at minimally all four of these and try to pick the one that you feel would most benefit the way you do business and get some expertise with it. Then I'm leading into telling you a little bit about We Can Code It and why you might want to consider some education with us. And the way that I'm going to approach that is there are several different approaches to design and development. One is to big company, kind of like OnShift, where I was attempting to do, but employ full-time in-house designers and developers. So everybody is an employee of that company. Very distinct advantages. The employee tends to stay more involved. You know, there tends to be an esprit de corps within the company that makes them work all that much harder and care that much more, especially to communicate. Communication tends to be a lot easier. So easier for them to communicate. They're more agile. They can make changes more quickly. Everybody that has to be conferred with to make a directional change or to change the product they're going to use is all under the same roof. So it's a more agile approach. And the project team has greater control. I can fire you, you know, but more realistically, you know, they can walk down the hall and be in a designer's office or be in a coder's office within a matter of minutes. So a lot more control. Disadvantages, though, it's probably the most expensive way to develop web applications. It's much harder to find good talent. You know, there's a whole lot of design firms out there that I can draw on that have excellent talent. But if I'm going to hire one full time, I've got my hands full. The workload is uneven. And by that, you know, I might work really hard for a 3 or 4 month period as we're rolling out a new web app. And then when the next one's in the design phase, I may sit and twiddle my fingers as a designer or as a web coder. So the workloads are uneven. And it doesn't seem to be as innovative. When you bring in fresh blood, I think you get greater innovation. So there's benefits and disadvantages to doing work that way. But organizations like this typically won't be bringing in designers from the outside. I think, in my opinion, this is probably the best approach. Engage with an outside design agency, which I suspect many of you work for, and and the advantages are it's time efficient, because you're only paying for that person as well as cost effective when you need them, and if one of them is busy, you can bring in another one. Whereas if your in-house design person is busy, you don't have another alternative. You got to go outside and get somebody. You get much fresher perspectives. The people that you're bringing in from the outside have worked on multiple products with multiple organizations, and they are going to bring those new perspectives to your design table. So another major advantage. And the others, there's a really wide range of providers that you can draw upon. You go on the internet, you can find a host of design firms. And naturally, one of the disadvantages is that they're not all exactly the same. You have organizations that just don't deliver what they have promised to you. Many of them use a cookie cutter approach. They've got the same approach. No matter who they engage with, they use the same methodology to deliver. You want to find one that is going to be sensitive to making your web app extremely unique. You have a lack of control as a project leader within the engaging company, because these folks are typically outside your brick and mortar building, managed by someone else, maybe working on multiple projects simultaneously, so not as much control. Communication problems can exist, and many firms have turned to offshore design just because it's cheap, and a lot of communication problems. I didn't work with designers. I worked with some offshore developers for a good period of time, and communication was a problem. Time difference was a problem. Cheap, but not really productive. And then in bringing in outside designers, working with in-house developers, you typically end up with more designer-developer conflicts, because you haven't had opportunity to have coffee together in the coffee room for the last year. You don't share stories about your family for the last year, and you haven't worked on another successful project together. So those are potential disadvantages. But the third one is the one that I'm hoping you'll find really attractive, and that is to engage with outside design organizations that also in tandem offer development services. So they're one-stop shopping. Now, today, I think there's a lot of business out there that would take advantage of one-stop shopping. My wife's family, nice Italians, all of them, they've got 5 restaurants. They're doing a ton of web work presently in making their menus and their delivery and the ease of access to getting their products put online. They are not project managers. They don't have any idea of what IT development's all about. They love engagement that can do it all. That's going to give them that unique design that's going to attract me as a patron, and do all of the development that is necessary to incorporate paying for it online and calculating tips and all of the things that particular industry requires. And there's tons of industries like that that are relatively naive about IT and want to engage with an organization that can do it all. So the advantages to the company is it keeps their attention where it matters most. They shouldn't be worried about web development. They should be worried about, how can I attract more customers? Should I expand my product line? It's cost effective. Outsourcing is and should be cheaper than if you do it in-house. You're going to stay up to date with the latest technologies. You can't, with a small staff, keep everybody on the leading edge. If you engage with the right organization, you're going to have leading edge technology. And you should get much more efficient website development and design out of a good firm. But you got to be careful when they enroll or enlist with companies like the ones you folks work for. They've got to make sure that it's a stable company, has a good reputation. You've got to access references. And then there's going to be project management issues potentially. They're going to have somebody in-house that's going to be somewhat riding herd on you and probably making undue demands, but that's a potential problem. And then if you're offshore with it, you have all of the prior offshore as well as geopolitical issues that can come into play and might delay or totally prevent the delivery of the application that you're expecting. So what do you have to do to get into that environment is you've got to bring coders into your organization, or you yourself have to become more code proficient to make your hourly rate more attractive to your present employer or to the people that you do work for. And on this screen, what I did was just stole some North American full-time employee for designing and coding when you're hiring people from outside. And when I look at, just a junior developer, $95 to $101 an hour, mid-level, 120 to 127. If you have the capacity for it, you're leaving money on the table by not bringing these resources in-house for yourself. So I would like to see you folks potentially consider expanding your technical capabilities, but just as importantly, I want to make you aware of what our company does, what we do at We Can Code It, because it's not only pertinent for your professional careers, but we've all got brothers, sisters, cousins, children, grandchildren that could potentially benefit by a web coding career. And that's where we come into play at We Can Code It. So just a little commercial about us. We've been voted one of the best coding boot camps for 5 years in a row now in the country. We're extremely proud of that. We were founded in 2014, about 7 years ago, by the lady that unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, Melanie McGee, one of the most talented people I've ever worked with. We have a campus in Cleveland. We have one in Columbus. We're registered with the State Board of Career Colleges and Schools. Very, very proud of our accomplishments in the last 7 years. I personally joined them about 2.5 years ago, and initially I was their admissions director. The admissions staff worked for me. I really enjoyed working here because what we do is we take people that don't have any coding experience at all, and in a 14-week or a 22-week period, turn them into full stack developers, meaning they can do the front end and the back end. So very advantageous to understand and be able to do both sides. Down at the bottom of this slide we're looking at, you see 90%. That is our average over the last 3 years of students finding jobs within a 6-month window. The state measures us that way. They look at 6 months from the date of graduation. 90% of our graduates find work within 6 months, and our average starting salary is $56,000. We have kids, and I call them kids. Our students age anywhere from 25 to 50 years old, typically, is where they fall. Most recently, we had a student that actually got hired before he graduated. He got hired as a web developer for the Cleveland Cavaliers. It was really quite outstanding. But we're very protective of that 90%. State holds our feet to the fire on that, as do the awards that we win. So to protect it, we've got a journey that you go through with us that's very well thought out, very effective. Step number one is you go through an assessment. Not everybody is cut out to be a web developer. I loved coding when I first started, but I've had my son, for example, supposedly he's got a genius IQ. He looked at coding. He said, there's no way in the world I want to be a web coder. I couldn't possibly do that. So we put you through a little bit of education, give you some YouTube videos to watch, and ask you to take a 20-question quiz. You need to score a 70 on that to get into the school. But it's good because it's fair to the student, and we want to protect our graduates and make sure that we're producing a product that can get hired. We put them through a brief interview just to make sure that they're team players, they communicate relatively well, and thirdly, that they understand what they're getting into. They understand what the career is all about. They understand what the future can be within that career. Then we have a financial aid team. And if any of you were interested in the school, they work with you. They can find scholarships, grants. The state of Ohio is forking out big bucks right now to help people get more technically oriented. They want to turn Ohio into a tech mecca. We just won that plant down in Columbus, the chip making plant. That's just the start. Now, the state of Ohio is pumping a lot of money into our students to help them get through the curriculum. Then in the curriculum, we have that 14-week or 22-week program. The 22-week would probably be most realistic for you folks. It's what we call part-time. You go 22 weeks every other weekend. You're not in school every weekend, Saturday and Sunday from 9 o'clock till 5 o'clock in the evening. And when you graduate, you're that full stack developer. So the weekends we call code jams. You have 11 code jams over that period of time. You will learn all of the tools that are necessary to be a good web developer, front end and back end. HTML, that I think you're all familiar with, cascading style sheets. You learn library systems. If you don't know those already, you should. Library systems hold the code. It's a lockbox for the development teams. Your artifacts that you deliver end up in that library system as well. You'll learn JavaScript, like I mentioned, that's so important on the front end as a programming language there. You will learn how to use a programmer's sandbox, I like to call them. They're called IDEs. They're interactive development environments. We teach IntelliJ, the most popular one that there is in the entire industry across the United States. Then we teach you in detail the agile development methodology. I would say 95% of the companies out there are using agile. Paramount that you learn it. In the last 4 or 5 weeks of the cohort, our class period's called a cohort, you will develop a full web application as your graduate exercise. You'll be put on a team with 3 or 4 other students. As a group, you will pick and design the application you want to build. Comes from your own heads. We don't say, here, you can build this, this, or this. You come up with your own idea of what would be a good web app that when we demonstrate it on graduation day, which we call demo day, employers that see the application that we built are going to be impressed. And some of the applications they've designed have gone on to be put into production as commercial applications. but you'll develop it using all of the tools you learned, and you'll use the agile methodology. You'll meet in those scrums every day. You'll develop it remotely, mostly remotely. We have classes face-to-face or remote, but they're hybrid. You can go to class one day and stay home the next. So you can mix and match whether you want to be in Cleveland. We've got a classroom in Columbus as well. You will learn how to develop remotely, because that's where the industry is headed right now. Remote development is extremely important. My daughter works for Progressive Insurance. She is in IT. She hasn't been in the office for 18 months, and she thinks that's going to continue. Then, not maybe so important to you folks, but if you'd send us one of your friends or one of your children or a grandchild, we work very closely in the classroom and preparing them to get hired. Help them with a resume, help them with their interviewing skills, put them through mock IT interviews, and also work with them on LinkedIn. So it's a very well thought out journey. And at the very end, we have career advancement professionals. These aren't the technical instructors. These folks take them by the hand and start pointing them at companies with whom they should interview. So don't forget us. It's a great school, very, very successful in virtually every aspect and extremely friendly. The part-time class that might be of interest to some of you actually starts this coming April 1st. It'll finish up the 28th of August, and 22 weeks long, but you only go every other weekend from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. And you'll have some homework during the 2-week hiatus. And then we also set up regularly scheduled Zoom tutoring sessions through that period. Additionally, we have some free education, and this is something you should take special note of. One piece is called the Learn to Code series, and it's just 3 evenings, 2 hours each evening. The next one is on February 7th, 8th, and 9th from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And in there, you create your own little chat bot. It's an online app that can automatically answer questions for you. So it lets you put your hands on the keyboard as a developer to see whether or not development would be something that would truly be attractive to you. Then coming up, and this is brand new for us, we just won a huge grant to assist us with this. We are building what we are calling our upskill course offering. And what this does is assume that you're already a professional. You might be a designer, you might be a web coder, and we are going to offer a whole series of incremental classes that will improve your value as a designer or as a coder. And one of the targets that will be available, targeted now for fourth quarter, is a UI UX course. And these will be relatively inexpensive courses. They'll be handled either at night or on the weekends and intended to help you improve your skill set as, in your cases, as a designer. But we'll be having also courses for the people that are developers, and they learn things like React, which is a blueprint for developing Java applications. They'll learn advanced JavaScript. So just a whole bunch of things that will allow an already professional to significantly improve their job worth through courseware that we'll offer. To take a look at those code classes a little closer and to just look at us, our website is wecancodeit.org. And I would look at the events on our main menu would take you to those various course offerings. And there's a registration area there if you'd like to attend that February class. And then lastly, This is my email address at We Can Code It. So if you want to communicate with me, it's just Don, WONK, at wecancodeit.org. So if you have questions or concerns, be more than glad to communicate with you. So thank you. I hope I didn't run too far over.
That was really good timing. I thought that like really was comprehensive and kind of what I perfect of what I wanted covered. So why don't you unshare your screen and then we can have time for Q&A. And there was one
Very good.
already. I think Judy asked this in the chat. What's the cost for the Intro to Code class, which I thought you said was free, the one that's on 7th, 8th, and 9th. Is that right?
Yeah, the one that's on February 7th, that intro class is free. You just have to go to our webpage and register, and it's held virtually. You've got to have a Mac or a laptop to walk through the exercises at home, but it's been exceptionally well received.
What are the classes on the 8th and the 9th then? Are those different classes or are those like paid?
No, 7th, 8th, and 9th, they are all one class. You have to attend 3 evenings to
Okay.
complete the class,
All right. So that
but no charge.
that's a good price. So, all right. So anybody have any questions? Like unmute your mic and go ahead and ask Don.
I will send my slide set. It's a Google PowerPoint, if you will. I'll send it to you in PDF format, and then anybody can view it on any machine they want to look at it.
Okay. I have a question for you.
Sure.
I know in the advertising industry, so it's maybe it's not, like mostly for bigger agencies, but there's like a creative director and an art director, and then creative director is like big picture, art director is sort of handles parts of that, and then there's usually production artists that do sort of the mechanical, detail work. Does that exist in the coding world too? Like where there's like a coding director, overall over one, and because like I've
Oh
seen.
yeah. You're well. Let's look at OnShift, which slightly different, but they have products that are software as a service. They deliver their application over the internet, and companies pay a monthly fee. So there is a product owner that is responsible for interacting with the end user community and finding out what they require in the way of change or improvement to the application. Then you're going to have a director of development, and everybody has something similar to this in the coding world, regardless of who the company is. So you'll have a director of development, and then you're going to have a director typically of design reporting up to the development director, and you're going to have a director of code that's actually going to be responsible to have all the web coders working for them. And then the UI UX people at the point that I've been exposed to would be reporting up to the design director. And then there may be separate teams beneath them that would be responsible for individual products. Like you take somebody like Progressive, they've got a team that builds for the automobile insurance industry. They've got a team that builds for the RV industry. They've got a team that builds for motorcycles. So, but you will have a director of IT, you will have design directors or VPs, you'll have code directors, and then they will have various teams beneath them. So it gets pretty complicated.
Who's like responsible for maintenance afterwards, and like whether it's like continuing content to make it for the website, like.
Oh, I left one team out of that. That's QA, quality assurance. There's a group there that is responsible for just testing everything that's built and every change that comes out to make sure that everything's absolutely watertight. So QA is in there as well. And that would be a separate department from design or web code development. To your question, maintenance is usually handled by the team that developed it. And within that team, they may have people that are designated as maintenance oriented, but typically it's members of the whole team because they're intimately familiar with the code.
Okay.
I have a comment. I don't really have a question, but I have a comment. For those of us who wear many hats in doing design and development for the web, the easiest thing I can say, and I've had a little experience, not a lot yet, but I've had enough to be able to say this. The best hat to put on when you're dealing and trying to engage with a developer, if you're a designer like me, is to put the cards on the table, what you know and what you don't. And then respect each other. And then they put what they know and what they don't, and you respect each other and say, look, we're here to create an entity for a client. So
Yep.
our goal is the same. So to me, that kind of levels things out so that, you know, you're not doing any chest bumping. You're not trying to prove anything, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're just
exactly.
kind of there to achieve the same thing. And what you don't know, you ask or you find out. And what they don't know, they can ask and they can find out.
You know, though, I think you'd be surprised at how many people, for whatever reason, are reluctant to do that.
Oh, well,
You know,
I
it
don't work
takes
with
a
them.
little courage to say, you know, yeah, I suspect you're not that kind of person, Mary.
No, I'm perfectly happy saying what I don't know because I learn all
Well,
the time.
well, not only what you don't know, but just saying, you know, here's what I do know. Now you tell me what I need to know. And for some people, those are hard questions. But
Yeah,
great point.
it's kind of hard to do and not everybody can do it. So it's a choice of whether you want to delve into that part of the design world or not. But from a human standard, from a human standpoint, I should say, just take a breath and put it out there. And you'd be surprised how much it works out if you're just human about it instead of, you know, the chest bumping thing. But, you know, I did my share of chest bumping when I was younger. So
do you work for yourself or you work for a company?
no, I've had my own business for 21 years. So
Oh, okay. Okay.
but it's what makes designers shy away from doing that kind of work if they're not familiar with it, or working with somebody if they're not familiar with it. It's not intimidation. It's more of the unknown and the lack of confidence in trying, and what you were saying, communication.
I don't know if they do it or not, but boy, you would like to think that in a design curriculum, I've had some people have design college degrees, that in that curriculum, they would have a class that would deal with communication, you know, and I'll bet they don't.
I think I just wanted to point that out, that some of us used to work for bigger corporations or bigger companies or bigger firms. And some of us have never, and some of us are still. So it kind of with CD Plug, it goes kind of all across the board.
Yeah. Well, good, very good comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think a lot of the kind of stuff that CD Pug members would be doing with websites would be publication related. You know, like whether it's not necessarily, but you know, a lot of this, you know, starts with print, but either it's like, you know, there's a magazine or a newsletter, or there's some kind of that's tied to the website, or it's going to the web instead of print.
Some of us are doing all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and they all tie in. So it's an interesting challenge.
I think of some of it like left brain, and I guess it's simplistic, but left brain and right brain kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and using both sides. It's okay to be dominant, but you need to use on one side of your brain, but it's good to use both of them.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be completely, 50-50 or whatever, or 100-100 per side, but that you can do both.
And it matters what you're comfortable with doing. It does matter. And sometimes you got to walk out of that comfortable box to learn something new and to figure out how you're going to get to your goal. Sometimes it takes that. And we all learn. We all learn that way, in my opinion. You just take one foot in front of the other, and at some point, you'll have to take a risk to get to your goal.
I think what I enjoy most about building applications is dealing with the people, and interpreting what they need, and then designing something that's gonna meet that need. I get a lot of gratification out of that.
That's good.
I'm good at that, but like I said, I just don't have a sense on, how to bring together the artistic piece of that, the graphic piece of that. And I tip my, if you can do both, Mary.
I think those upskill courses that you're offering are really perfect for CD Pug members, because I don't know. I mean, there's a few of us that might want to like take an intense course and change careers and learn coding, or even like the free ones in February where you get some HTML basics. I think those are perfect for our membership, and I think there's probably a lot of other like prospects out there for those classes, I think.
Well, we're building out the obvious ones, but there are going to be probably double or triple the number of courses as we continue. So I would love to have recommendations from you as to, what would make a good upskill course for your organization or courses.
I want to comment on something. We usually use a content management system, or we are dependent on for digital newsletters on MailChimp or other similar platform, which does have the ability to do HTML and CSS, but it's very, very limited, including a CMS like using part of the WordPress, that we can modify certain things, but even if we have installed a particular thing that would allow us to design it visually, but has limited access to coding, but still not good enough. For example, WordPress would give you like probably 6, 7, 8, 10 and more CSS files, which are very complicated. And on the other hand, the MailChimp would give you the opportunity to do something with the code, but it's kind of complicated. For example, for me, I'm a designer. I want to know more. I know a little bit, but it's kind of complicated for me to get into the next step. I don't think that I am going to be a developer, but I definitely would like to know more about the coding part, so I can communicate better with programmers if I need to. That's my comment.
I didn't mention them here, but the upskill, there is another piece of that, and we call it pre-skill. We've got courses that we've built that would be before you would attend our full boot camp, that would go into JavaScript more deeply, go into HTML more deeply, go into CSS very deeply. You might want to look at those. Those might meet your needs. You don't want to be a full-blown developer, but you would like to improve your coding skills. And that's what the pre-skill, as we're calling them, courses are designed to do. You'll see those hitting our website within the next week or two. So take a visit there at wecancodeit.org and look at the course offering about a week from now. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
And you say the state of Ohio is doing what? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you got the floor.
Go ahead, Mary. Why don't you take
Oh,
it?
I was just going to say, you said something earlier about the state of Ohio throwing money at people wanting to develop their skills. That might be something to delve into, Vesela, too, is that's very true. I've been kind of keeping part of an eye on stuff like that with the state of Ohio. Kind
Yeah,
of possible to get some help too, to get yourself sorted that way.
I think the benefit would be that, for example, a lot of things can be done much faster, and building such skills would make the process much more productive.
yeah, I have not seen the total syllabus for the pre-skill classes. I'm hoping they'll be exactly what you would like to see.
Okay, I think we're in good shape for kind of wrapping up, I think, don't you, Mary?
Sure. Thank you so much, everybody,
Thank
for
you, Don.
attending.
Yeah, thank you very much. We appreciate your effort in preparing. That was really very helpful to us, I think.
Really liked it, Don. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thank you all. You've been a pleasure. And Spike, you and I need to talk, see if anybody wants to win that fishing trip. And I look forward to perhaps crossing paths with some of you others in the future.
Yeah,
I entered it already.
Have a coding and a designer party when COVID's over and get to know each other better.
Yeah, that would be fun. All right, folks. Well, have a good evening. It's been
All
a
right.
pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
See you later.
Thanks, Don.
Good night.
Good night.